In tabletop role-playing games, whenever people mention the word challenge, usually what we think about is the enemies, the monsters, or the antagonists that player characters must face in order to get to achieve their goal. But one thing that usually comes up is the question, how do I make enemies that challenge my players without just making them harder to hit? In this video, I intend to tackle just that by giving you 3 tips on how to make enemies that are more engaging or more fun or smarter. But before we begin, I wanted to thank you for clicking on this video and watching it, and I do urge you to watch till the end because it's good information, and if you haven't done so far, please do subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell icon so you can stay up to date with the videos that I'm going to post. And if you like the video, then go ahead and like it too once the video is done, because right now you don't know if you're going to like the video or the content. But anyway, to the matter at hand. And I wanted to make a little disclaimer before we began the video. I use the word monsters whenever I talk about enemies because it's easier to say, and not necessarily because I think that all enemies should be monstrous creatures. It's just a way that it's easier for me to click, and when you hear monster, you know it's usually an enemy, so yeah, it's easier for the clarification of certain concepts. So anyway, with that said, here we go. And the first thing I want to discuss before we begin talking about the ways to make enemies smarter or more challenging or more fun is the word archetype. According to the dictionary, Google, and I am going to paraphrase, an archetype is basically a general idea of something, a typical example of something. And when I'm going to be using the word archetype in the video, I'm going to use it to refer to the general idea or concepts behind the character. And I'm going to be using the word archetype a lot because it has a lot to do with exactly how we can make the enemies or the monsters smarter. And the first aspect that you should definitely consider is the creature's archetype. Is it a dragon? Is it a slime monster? Is it a person? What are its physical capabilities? Is it able to climb? Does it have any arms or legs? How many heads does it have? Does it have hair or scales? Is it organic? Is it inorganic? Also, what are its mental capabilities? Can it talk? How can it communicate? Can it communicate? What are its supernatural capabilities? You see, all of these things weaved together create the monster's archetype. And it's very important for us to differentiate how all of these different archetypes can alter the way that the monster reacts in certain situations, which we're going to talk about a little bit later in the video. And I want to start giving you examples so you can see exactly what I mean. If we're talking about a human archetype kind of enemy, humans or humanoid creatures, we usually understand that they have at least 2 arm-like limbs, 2 leg-like limbs. They usually also have 1 head. Now, there are other things, some physical or physiological features that may change depending on the setting or the race or whatever, but we expect them to be able to behave in a certain way. Also, because they're humanoid, we expect them to have some sort of communication. They all have their own drive, they all have their own intentions. And all of this is very different from, say, a fish-like enemy. A fish-like monster, basically its own drive is to survive and to eat. So unless there's something different going on with this fish-like monster, it's going to behave exactly as we expect. Now, what are the physiological capabilities of a humanoid as opposed to a fish-like monster? All special conditions aside, if we have, for example, a merfolk, then obviously the merfolk is going to be able to swim almost as fast as the fish monster. But if we have a normal humanoid under regular circumstances, let's say just a regular human, we know that the human can climb, the fish can't. The human can run, and a fish obviously cannot. All of these things figure into exactly how the enemy is going to act. Now, what are some of the mental capabilities? Well, humans, as we know, are pretty darn smart, or should be. Some are smarter than others. You see, humans have developed language, which I think is the most important invention in all of history. Fish, however, they do communicate, but they don't have language, which means that a human character is able to interact with the players or with other creatures, other human creatures, by writing. A fish cannot do that. A fish maybe can mark certain things, but not write a specific language using specific syntax. And also, what are the creature's supernatural capabilities? For most of the games based on fantasy setting, humans are able to use magic, are able to perform magical actions. So they're able to tap into this magical energy and be able to manifest it in a plethora of ways. A fish monster won't necessarily have that supernatural capability. The second thing you should consider when trying to make an enemy smarter is how does that enemy interact with its environment? And here we're talking about how does it interact with its surroundings, how does it interact with creatures of its same archetype, or how does it interact with creatures of a separate or a different archetype. And for that, let's go back to the example of the human and the fish creature. As we know, humans interact with their environment in very different ways. And even in a fantasy setting, we can see how different humanoid creatures, different archetypes, interact with their environments in different ways. For example, usually elves interact with their environment by making sure that they enhance nature, and they use nature in trees and the fields as the main inspiration for everything that they do. In many settings, trees are sacred to the elves. What about dwarves? Well, dwarves, being humanoid creatures, they are usually depicted as miners, and they go into the mountains and they dig into them and take their ores, and they're usually depicted as being very good blacksmiths. Let's take orcs. Also humanoid creatures, but the way that they're usually represented is very warlike, very tribal, aggressive, and brutal. And how do these different creatures interact with their own? But also, how does this enemy interact with creatures of other archetypes? Elves are usually depicted as not wanting to have any kind of interaction with other races. Orcs also are usually depicted as very aggressive, specifically towards other races. Fairies, even though in Dungeons and Dragons, they tend to be depicted as fae and not exactly as humanoids, but in many settings, fairies are very humanoid in the way they behave and their drives and motivations. So the way that they're presented is either they are extremely mischievous, or they like to serve people. They like to serve members of other archetypes or other races. The third aspect that I think you should consider when making an enemy smarter is, what is their drive? What is this enemy's motivation? What are their belief systems, if they even have any? You see, humans all act different, depending on not just their personality, but also what their motivation is. What is their belief system? What makes them angry? What brings them pleasure? All of these different things can alter the way that the enemy behaves towards the player characters. And while humanoid creatures have all of these lists of things that they alter the way that they behave, animal creatures, however, like I said before, basically only want to do two things. They want to survive and they want to eat. That's basically it. So let's say there's a combat situation and the player characters are fighting against a humanoid or human enemies. The human enemies, when they are dealt a lot of damage, let's say that they are pretty worn out, they're pretty beat up, they can do one of two things. Usually, they either believe that they have lost and they choose to either surrender or run, or because their belief is so strong, they decide to go at it until the end, and that it's either victory or death. An animal creature, on the other hand, it's probably going to try to book it and get the heck out of there because its instinct to survive is much stronger than anything. I mean, I would rather just leave the line than have to wait for 2 hours for Popeyes to hurry up and give me my order. Or Church's Chicken. Yeah, they do that too. So what is the creature's main motivation? What is its belief system? Why is it going to attack you? Or under what circumstances does it decide to attack you? What will make it stop attacking you? Will it go all the way until it dies? Or it decides to just call a truce and maybe have a way to end the attack because they don't want to die themselves? So, in summary, the 3 aspects that you should consider when making enemies smarter is: what is their archetype? How do they interact with their environment? And what is their drive? Now, I've told you a few things, and I've given you the example of a human character versus a fish monster. But remember that all creatures are different, and all creatures, especially in a fantasy setting, have multiple different aspects that you should be considering, or have different skills, or have different abilities that really alter the way that the character feels or that the enemy feels in a given situation. Take beholders in D&D, for example. Even though they just look like large floating eye monsters with a mouth and a bunch of tentacles with eyes attached to them, because that's basically what they are, in truth, beholders are extremely intelligent creatures according to the descriptions given by the different books. This immediately throws everything we think out the window because now the way that we approach the beholder as player characters is very different. And that's basically it. It does require some training in order to master the skill of being able to make smarter enemies, but I have homework for you. Open up Pinterest or DeviantArt or any other image gallery, even Google Images works, and type creatures or type creature monsters or creature enemies or just simple enemies. And then look at the creature and think about all these 3 aspects. What is the creature's archetype and how do the creature's physiological, intellectual, and supernatural capabilities affect the way it behaves? Also, how would it interact with its environment? How would it interact with the world around them? Creatures that are of the same archetype or creatures that are of different archetypes? And lastly, what is the enemy's motivation? Does the monster only want to survive? Or does it have a certain motivation? Is there anything, a goal that they're trying to accomplish? Does it believe in something? Think about these things, and then the next time that you're using a monster manual or any other kind of already pre-generated monsters, look at their abilities, look at their stat blocks, and try to understand how those can be applied in a narrative setting. Don't think of them as just points. Don't think of them as just mechanics of the game, like the actual system of the game. Think of them as how do these scores, how do these abilities, how do these skills affect the way they impact the narrative. This is how you make smarter enemies. Consider the enemy and all of the different interactions that it could have in the world that you have created and that you're presenting to your players as a player character. And that is it for the video. I hope you liked it, and if you did, and if you haven't done so far, make sure that you subscribe to the channel, share the video, like the video, and click on the notification bell icon so you can stay up to date with the videos that I'm going to post. Also, if you think there's anything that I missed, any way that you use yourself in order to make enemies smarter, make sure you let me know in the comments section below. I really do like reading all of the comments. It doesn't matter how old the video is. I'm still getting comments from videos that I posted a very long time ago, and that's fine because I really do want to talk to you guys. I recently got to 100 subscribers, and that is like a super achievement for me. So if you want to be added to the numbers, make sure you subscribe. Anyway, guys, I hope this has helped you and has answered some questions. And from the bottom of my heart, have a great day, and peace!